At my daughter's wedding, my new son-in-law demanded, in front of 200 guests, that I hand over the keys to my farm. When I refused, he struck me so hard I nearly fell. I left the reception hall bleeding and made a single call. His face turned pale the moment he realized who I had called. I never thought my daughter's wedding day would end with me on the marble floor, but that's exactly how it unfolded when Derek finally revealed his true nature. The morning had begun like a dream. My daughter, Isabel, looked stunning in her grandmother's vintage lace gown, the same one my late wife Elena wore 30 years ago, walking her down the aisle of the old chapel. I fought back tears as she whispered that she wished her mother could see her. For a few moments everything was perfect. For a few moments I let myself forget the unease that had been building in me about Derek for months. The ceremony was flawless. Isabel radiated happiness, and I forced myself to smile whenever Derek's eyes met mine. He was practiced at charm, the kind that deceived almost everyone. But I had learned to look deeper. For nearly 2 years he had been circling questions about my farmland, my will, and what would happen to the property once I was gone. By the cocktail hour, Derek's mask had started slipping. I stood at the bar, nursing a whiskey, when he appeared beside me. His bow tie was loose, his face flushed with champagne, and there was something cold in his eyes. "Marcus," he said, clapping my shoulder harder than necessary, "we need to talk." "What about, son?" I asked, keeping my voice even. The word son made his jaw tighten before he forced a thin smile. "About the farm. About Isabel's future. About our future. This isn't the time or place, Derek. Enjoy your wedding day." But he leaned closer, lowering his voice to a whisper that somehow felt more threatening than a shout. "Actually, it's the perfect time. Look around, all these witnesses." A chill ran through me as I realized how carefully he had staged this. His business partners, his family, his colleagues. All eyes were nearby. Isabel, meanwhile, was across the room laughing with her college friends, oblivious. Then Derek pulled out a small velvet box. For a fleeting second I thought it might be a gift, but when he opened it, my blood turned cold. Inside was a set of keys. My keys. To the house, the barn, the equipment shed. "How did you get those?" I asked, my voice low. "Isabel made copies," Derek replied smoothly. "She thought it would be symbolic, but what I really want are the originals and the deed transfer papers." My hand trembled around the whiskey glass. "The what?" "Don't act down, Marcus. Isabel is your only child. The farm should be hers, ours, and honestly, a man your age can't handle it much longer anyway." The insult landed like a slap, drawing gasps from those listening. Isabel's aunt covered her mouth in shock, and now Isabel herself noticed the tension and began hurrying over, confusion etched on her face. "No, Derek," I said firmly. That single word tore away his mask completely. His expression twisted with rage, his breath hot with alcohol as he leaned in. "You stubborn old fool. Do you have any idea who you're messing with?" Before I could respond, before I could step back, before anyone could intervene, Derek's hand cracked across my face with a sound that echoed through the silent reception hall like a gunshot. The slap was hard enough to knock me off balance. My left foot slipped on the polished marble and I went down hard, my hip hitting the floor first, then my shoulder. Pain exploded through my body as I lay there stunned, the taste of blood filling my mouth where I'd bitten my tongue. For a moment there was absolute silence, then the whispers started rising like a wave. "Did he just hit him? Oh my God, did you see that? Someone call security." I pushed myself up on my elbow, looking around at the circle of horrified faces surrounding me. Derek stood over me, his chest heaving, his fists still clenched. He looked as shocked as everyone else, as if he couldn't believe what he had just done. That's when I saw Isabel. She was standing at the edge of the crowd, her hands pressed to her mouth, tears streaming down her cheek. But she wasn't moving toward me. She wasn't rushing to help her father who had just been assaulted at her wedding. She was staring at Derek with something that looked like fear. In that moment I realized this wasn't the first time she had seen this side of him. Slowly, painfully, I got to my feet. My hips screamed in protest and I could feel a bruise forming on my cheekbone. But I stood tall. I looked Derek straight in the eye, then let my gaze sweep across the crowd of guests, many of whom I'd known for decades. "I think," I said quietly, my voice carrying in the stunned silence, "this reception is over." I turned and walked toward the exit, my leg aching with every step. Behind me I could hear Derek's voice, higher now, desperate. "Marcus, wait. I didn't mean that. We can work this out." I didn't turn around. I didn't acknowledge him. I simply walked out of the reception hall, out of the hotel, and into the parking lot where my truck was waiting. Once I was safely inside the cab, I pulled out my phone. My hands were still shaking, but I managed to find the contact I needed. The phone rang once, twice, and then a familiar voice answered. Marcus, how did the wedding go? I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of what I was about to unleash. Robert, I need you to come to Houston tonight. It's time. There was a pause. Are you sure? Once we do this, there's no going back. I looked back at the hotel, where I could see figures moving behind the lit windows of the reception hall. Somewhere in there, my daughter was probably crying. Somewhere in there, Derek was probably trying to explain away what had just happened. Somewhere in there, the life I'd built for the past 25 years was crumbling. I'm sure, I said. It's time everyone knew the truth about the ranch. As I drove away, I caught a glimpse of Derek in my rearview mirror. He was standing at the hotel's entrance, frantically talking on his phone, his face pale with panic. He had no idea what was coming for him, but he was about to find out. The drive back to the ranch gave me too much time to think about how we had gotten to this point. 25 miles of dark highway stretched before me, and with each mile, the memories came flooding back. Not the good ones from Isabel's childhood, but the slow, systematic destruction of our relationship that Derek had orchestrated over the past 2 years. It started small, the way these things always do. Little comments that seemed innocent enough at first. Dad seems really tired lately, doesn't he? Isabel would say during our Sunday dinners. Maybe he's working too hard on the ranch. At first I thought she was being caring. My 68-year-old body did ache more than it used to, and managing 800 acres of cattle ranch wasn't getting any easier. But then the comments became more frequent. More point. Derek thinks you should consider hiring more help, she mentioned one evening as we sat on the porch watching the sunset. He's worried about you handling everything alone. Derek, who had never set foot on a working ranch before meeting my daughter. Derek, who wore designer suits to family barbecues and complained about the dust. Derek was worried about me. The real manipulation started about 18 months ago, right after Derek proposed. Suddenly, every conversation with Isabel included his opinions, his concerns, his suggestions. He was always the reasonable one, the practical one, the one looking out for everyone's best interests. Derek says it's not fair that I don't have any legal claim to the ranch, Isabel told me one day, her voice carefully neutral. He says most fathers would have already started the transfer process. I remember the way my coffee tasted bitter that morning, the way my chest tightened with something I couldn't name yet. Transfer process. You know, putting the property in my name for tax purposes. Derek's looked into it. He says we could save thousands in estate taxes if we plan ahead. Derek again, always Derek with his research, his plans, his convenient solutions to problems I didn't know I had. The worst part was watching my daughter change. Isabel had always been independent, strong-willed like her mother. She had worked summers on the ranch, knew every fence line and water tank. But gradually Derek's voice started coming out of her mouth. Dad, you're being stubborn about this ranch thing, Isabel said during one particularly tense dinner. Derek just wants to help. He has experience with property management. Property management, as if the Double C Ranch was just another real estate investment. As if the land my grandfather had homesteaded in 1923 was just a business asset to be optimized. What kind of experience? I asked, though I already knew the answer would disappoint me. He manages several commercial properties in Houston. He knows about land values, market trends, that sort of thing. That sort of thing. Not the kind that involved getting up at 4:30 every morning to check on pregnant cows. Not the kind that meant repairing fences in 100-degree heat or losing sleep during drought years, praying the wells wouldn't run dry. The pressure intensified after they got engaged. Derek started showing up uninvited, usually when Isabel wasn't around. He'd walk the property with his phone out, taking pictures and asking questions about acreage and mineral rights. Just curious, he'd say with that practiced smile, trying to understand Isabel's heritage. But heritage wasn't what he was calculating. I caught him on the phone one afternoon, standing by the barn and talking to someone about land comps and development potential. When he saw me approaching, he ended the call quickly. Business call, he explained. You know how it is. I didn't know how it was. I'd never made a business call standing in someone else's barn without permission. The lies started small too. Derek would tell Isabel that I'd agreed to things I hadn't, that I'd said things I'd never said. Dad told Derek he's ready to slow down. Isabel informed me one Sunday, he's excited about having you take over more of the operations. I stared at my daughter across the dinner table, searching her face for any sign that she knew this wasn't true. But she believed him. She wanted to believe him. When did I say that? I asked carefully. Last week, when you two talked by the south pasture, she said. Derek said you seemed relieved to have someone to share the burden with. I remembered that conversation. Derek had cornered me while I was checking the fence line, asking pointed questions about profit margins and operating costs. I'd given him short answers and walked away as soon as I could. Somehow he had twisted my politeness into enthusiasm for his involvement. The gaslighting escalated from there. According to Derek, I was always saying things I didn't remember saying, agreeing to things I'd never agreed to. Isabel started looking at me with concern, as if I were becoming forgetful, unreliable. "Are you feeling okay, Dad?" she asked one evening after Derek had claimed I'd promised to show him the property survey maps. "You seem a little confused lately." Confused? That's what Derek wanted her to think. That her old father was losing his grip, becoming a burden, maybe even dangerous to himself and others. The truth was, I was more alert than I had been in years. I started paying attention to every word Derek said, every claim he made, every story he told. I began taking notes, tracking his lies, and I started making phone calls. The first call was to my lawyer, Jim Morrison, who had handled my affairs for 20 years. "Has anyone contacted you about transferring the ranch property?" I asked. "No, Marcus. Should someone?" "Derek Peterson, Isabel's fiancé. He's been telling her that property transfers are common for tax purposes." There was a long pause. "Marcus, you know the situation with the ranch." "That's not exactly accurate." I knew the situation. I'd known it for 25 years, but Derek didn't know it, and neither did Isabel. I'd been carrying that secret alone since Elena died, protecting my daughter from a truth that would have complicated her life unnecessarily. "I think it's time to make some calls, Jim. Are you sure?" "Once we start this process." "I'm sure." The second call was harder. Robert Hawthorne had been my contact for 25 years, checking in quarterly and managing the financial aspects of my position. He was surprised to hear from me outside our normal schedule. "Is everything all right, Marcus?" "I think it's time to reveal the arrangement," I told him. "My daughter is marrying someone who doesn't understand the situation. That's a big decision." "Are you certain?" I thought about Derek's hands on my daughter, his voice in her ear, his plans for property that wasn't mine to give. "I'm certain." The third call was the most difficult. Dr. Patricia Santos had been our family physician for 15 years. She had delivered Isabel, held Elena's hand during the cancer treatments, and helped me through the darkest period of my life. "Patricia, I need you to do something for me. I need a complete physical and cognitive evaluation." "Marcus, you just had your annual physical 3 months ago. Everything was fine." "I know, but I need documentation. Official documentation that I'm mentally competent and physically capable." There was a pause. "Is someone suggesting otherwise?" I explained the situation as carefully as I could. How Derek was painting me as confused, forgetful, unable to manage my responsibilities. How Isabel was starting to believe it. "That son of a bitch," Patricia said, her professional demeanor slipping. "Excuse my language, but that's emotional abuse. Textbook manipulation. Can you help me? I'll do you one better. I'll run every test in the book. Blood work, cognitive assessment, physical capability evaluation. When I'm done, you'll have documentation that you're sharper than most 40-year-olds. The results came back exactly as Patricia predicted. Perfect blood pressure, excellent cognitive function, physical capabilities well above average for my age group. I kept the medical reports in my safe along with the other documents that would soon become very important. But I made one mistake during those months of preparation. I underestimated how far Derek would go to get what he wanted. I thought he'd keep pushing gradually, wearing me down with patience and persistence. I thought he'd continue the psychological campaign, slowly convincing Isabel that her father was becoming unreliable. I never imagined he'd try to humiliate me publicly at his own wedding. I never thought he'd be desperate enough to demand the ranch keys in front of 200 witnesses. And I certainly never expected him to hit me. That slap changed everything. It moved up my timeline by months, forced my hand in a way I hadn't planned. But maybe that was for the best. Maybe it was time Derek learned that some secrets are worth keeping, and some lies carry consequences he could never imagine. As I pulled into the ranch driveway, I could see my phone lighting up with missed calls. Isabel, probably. Derek, definitely. People who had witnessed what happened at the reception and wanted to know what came next. But there was only one call I cared about making. I dialed Robert's number again as I sat in my truck, looking out at the land I had protected for 25 years. "Robert, it's Marcus again. How soon can you get the board members to Houston? If it's urgent, I can have them here by tomorrow morning." I touched my swollen cheek, felt the ache in my hip where I had hit the marble floor. "It's urgent. Derek Peterson just made the biggest mistake of his life. It's time he learned who really owns the Double C Ranch. The truth about the Double C Ranch began 25 years ago. On the worst day of my life, Elena had been fighting cancer for 18 months. And we'd spent our life savings on treatments that ultimately couldn't save her. I was sitting in the hospital billing office, staring at invoices totaling over $300,000, when the ranch foreman found me there. "Mr. Wellington," he said, his hat in his hands. "I'm real sorry to bother you at a time like this, but we got a problem." The problem was drought. The worst in 50 years. Our cattle were dying. Our wells were running dry. And we had no money left to drill new ones. The bank was already circling, talking about foreclosure. Elena was gone. Isabel was only 7 years old, and I was about to lose everything my family had built since 1923. That's when Robert Hawthorne knocked on my door. I'll never forget that evening. I was sitting on the porch, watching the sun set over land that might not be mine much longer, when a black sedan pulled up the drive. A man in an expensive suit got out, carrying a leather briefcase and wearing the kind of confident expression that comes with serious money. "Mr. Wellington, I'm Robert Hawthorne, representing the Meridian Investment Consortium. I understand you might be interested in a business arrangement." I was too exhausted to be polite. "If you're here to make a lowball offer on my ranch, you can save us both some time." "Actually," he said, settling into the porch chair beside me without invitation, "I'm here to offer you something quite different. A chance to keep your ranch and solve your financial problems permanently." He opened his briefcase and pulled out a thick contract. "Meridian specializes in agricultural preservation. We buy ranches and farms from families in crisis, then lease them back to the original owners for management. You keep your home, your livelihood, your legacy. We handle the finances." I was skeptical. "What's the catch?" "No catch. You become our ranch manager. We pay you a generous salary, cover all operating expenses, and handle improvements and expansions. From the outside, nothing changes. You're still Henry Lawson running the Lawson Ranch. But legally, the property belongs to Meridian. For how long? Indefinitely. As long as you want the arrangement to continue. When you're ready to retire, we'll work out a transition plan. If you want to buy the property back someday, we'll negotiate fair terms based on current market value." I stared at the contract, my mind racing. "Why would you do that? What do you get out of it?" Martin smiled. "Meridian isn't just any investment group, Mr. Lawson. We represent some very wealthy individuals who believe in preserving American agricultural heritage. They don't need immediate returns. They're playing a longer game." "Who are these people?" "That's confidential. But I can tell you they're patriots who understand that family ranches like yours are the backbone of this country. They'd rather see them preserved and properly managed than broken up and sold to developers." The offer was too good to be true. A salary of $60,000 a year, plus full benefits, all ranch expenses covered, complete autonomy in day-to-day operations, and most importantly, Sophia would inherit my position when I was gone, along with the option to eventually buy back the land. I need time to think, of course. "But Miss Lawson, the bank is planning to start foreclosure proceedings next week. This offer expires in 48 hours. I signed the contract that night. What choice did I have? I was drowning, and Meridian threw me a lifeline. The next morning, trucks arrived with drilling equipment. Within a week, we had 3 new wells producing clean water. Within a month, the cattle were healthy again. Within 6 months, the ranch was more profitable than it had ever been under my ownership. For 25 years, the arrangement worked perfectly. Meridian sent quarterly checks, covered all major expenses, and never interfered with my decisions. Martin visited 4 times a year, always friendly and supportive. I was the ranch manager, but to everyone else I was still the owner. Even Sophia believed the ranch belonged to me. I planned to tell her the truth when she turned 21, but she was in college then, focused on her studies and her social life. When she graduated, she moved to Houston for her career. The ranch wasn't part of her immediate future, so I kept postponing the conversation. Then Derek came along, and everything changed. The first time he visited the ranch, he walked around like he was conducting an appraisal. He asked pointed questions about acreage, mineral rights, and land values. He wanted to see property records, tax assessments, and profit statement. "Just trying to understand Sophia's inheritance," he explained when I caught him photographing the barns and equipment. But his questions were too specific, too calculated. He wasn't just curious about Sophia's future. He was planning something. I called Martin that week. "We might have a problem." "What kind of problem?" "Sophia's boyfriend is asking a lot of questions about the property. He's pushing for information I can't give him without revealing the arrangement." "How serious is the relationship?" "Serious enough that he's talking about marriage." There was a long pause, Henry, you know the terms of the contract. If anyone outside the family discovers the true ownership structure, Meridian has the right to terminate the arrangement immediately. I knew. I'd read that clause dozens of times over the year. It was Meridian's protection against publicity or legal complications. If word got out that wealthy investors were secretly buying family ranches, it could create political problems they wanted to avoid. What are my options? Tell your daughter the truth. If she's planning to marry this man, she needs to know what she's really inheriting. But every time I tried to tell Sophia, Derek was there, steering the conversation in different directions, asking his own questions, making his own assumptions. He assumed the ranch was valuable property that would someday belong to Sophia. He assumed I was a wealthy landowner who could afford to be generous with wedding gifts and financial support. He had no idea that I was essentially a well-paid employee managing someone else's investment. The pressure intensified after they got engaged. Victor started making comments about improvements he wanted to make, changes he envisioned for the property. He talked about subdividing pastures, developing recreational facilities, maybe even selling off parcels for residential development. This place has incredible potential, he told me one afternoon standing on the hilltop overlooking the main house. With the right marketing, we could turn this into a destination ranch, wedding venue, corporate retreats, that sort of thing. My blood ran cold. The Meridian contract specifically prohibited any commercial development without board approval. Victor was planning to turn a working cattle ranch into a tourist attraction. That's not really my vision for the place, I told him carefully. Well, it won't be your decision much longer, will it? He smiled, but there was steel in his voice. Once Lena and I are married, we'll be the ones making those choices. That's when I realized Victor wasn't just planning to inherit the ranch. He was planning to take it over while I was still alive. He was maneuvering to push me aside, convince Lena that I was too old and stubborn to manage the property effectively. I started documenting everything. Every conversation, every demand, every lie he told Lena about what I'd supposedly agreed to. I also started preparing for the inevitable confrontation. The medical evaluation was just the beginning. I had my lawyer prepare a complete dossier on Victor Hale, his credit history, his business dealings, his previous relationships. What we found wasn't pretty. Victor had a pattern of targeting women with assets. His first marriage had ended when his wife discovered he'd been secretly borrowing against her inherited property. His business partnerships consistently failed, leaving his partners holding the debt while Victor moved on to new opportunities. But the most damaging information came from his current employer. Victor was facing an internal investigation for questionable expense reports and unauthorized use of company resources. He was likely to be fired within the next 6 months. He was desperate, and desperate men do dangerous things. I should have told Lena everything before the wedding. I should have sat her down and explained the whole situation, from the Meridian contract to Victor's financial problems. But I kept hoping she'd see through his manipulation on her own. I kept believing that my smart, independent daughter would recognize what was happening. Instead, Victor escalated to public humiliation and physical violence. He forced my hand in the worst possible way in front of the worst possible audience. Now, sitting in my truck in the ranch driveway, I knew there was no going back. Tomorrow morning, Robert would arrive with the Meridian board members. Victor would learn that he had just assaulted the manager of a ranch owned by some very powerful people. People who didn't appreciate threats to their investments or attacks on their employees. My phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. Victor's name flashed on the screen. I let it go to voicemail, then listened to his message. Samuel, look. I know things got out of hand tonight. I was stressed. Maybe had too much champagne, but we're family now. And family works things out. Call me back. We need to talk about moving forward. Moving forward. As if slapping me in front of 200 witnesses was just a minor bump in our relationship. As if tomorrow would bring business as usual. Victor had no idea what was coming for him. But in about 12 hours, he was going to get an education in the difference between seeming to own something and actually owning it. And more importantly, he was going to learn that some people have friends in very high places. I was up before dawn as usual, but this morning felt different. Every sound seemed amplified. The coffee maker gurgling, my boots on the hardwood floor, the distant lowing of cattle in the east pasture. Today was the day Victor Hale would learn that some secrets have consequences. Robert called at 6:15. We're about an hour out from the ranch. The board members flew in from Dallas, Denver, and Phoenix. They're not happy about being pulled away from their schedules, but when I explained the situation, they agreed this needed immediate attention. How much should I tell them about Victor? Everything. They'll want to understand exactly what kind of threat we're dealing with. I spent the next hour preparing. I pulled out all my documentation, the medical reports proving my competency, the legal assessment of Victor's character and financial situation, the recordings I'd made of our conversations over the past year, everything that would paint a complete picture of what had been happening. At 7:30, three black SUVs pulled up the ranch road, kicking up dust in the morning sun. I watched from the kitchen window as 6 people got out, all wearing business attire that looked out of place against the backdrop of cattle pasture and mesquite trees. Robert led the group, looking exactly the same as he had 25 years ago. Beside him walked a woman in her 60s with silver hair and the bearing of someone accustomed to being the smartest person in the room. The others were men in their 50s and 60s, all carrying themselves with the quiet confidence that comes from real power. "Samuel," Robert said as they approached the porch, "I'd like you to meet the Meridian Board. Margaret Caldwell, Chairwoman; James Morrison, Chief Financial Officer; David Chin, Legal Counsel; Thomas Wright, Operations Director; and Patricia Vasquez, Risk Management." I shook hands with each of them, noting their firm grips and direct eye contact. These weren't people who wasted time on pleasantries. "Miss Carter," Margaret Caldwell said, her voice crisp and professional. "Robert has briefed us on the situation. We understand you've been threatened and physically assaulted by someone attempting to gain control of this property." "That's correct." "And this person believes you own the ranch outright?" "He does. So does my daughter. I've maintained the fiction for 25 years as required by the contract." David Chin opened a briefcase and pulled out a tablet. "We've been doing our own research on Victor Hale since Robert called yesterday. What we found is disturbing." He turned the tablet toward me, showing a detailed financial profile. "Miss Hale is heavily in debt. Credit cards, personal loans, and what appears to be gambling obligations to some unsavory individuals. He owes approximately $150,000 to various creditors." Margaret Caldwell picked up the thread. "More concerning is his employment situation. Our contacts at his firm confirm he's under investigation for embezzlement. He's been using company credit cards for personal expenses and billing clients for work that was never performed. They're planning to fire him next week." Patricia Vasquez added, "He likely knows it's coming, which explains his desperation to secure assets through marriage." I felt a sick twist in my stomach. "Does Lena know any of this?" "We doubt it. We buy ranches and farms from families in crisis, then lease them back to the original owners for management. You keep your home, your livelihood, your legacy. We handle the finances." I was skeptical. "What's the catch?" "No catch. You become our ranch manager. We pay you a generous salary, cover all operating expenses, and handle improvements and expansions. From the outside, nothing changes. You're still Henry Lawson running the Lawson Ranch. But legally, the property belongs to Meridian. For how long? Indefinitely. As long as you want the arrangement to continue. When you're ready to retire, we'll work out a transition plan. If you want to buy the property back someday, we'll negotiate fair terms based on current market value." I stared at the contract, my mind racing. "Why would you do that? What do you get out of it?" Martin smiled. "Meridian isn't just any investment group, Mr. Lawson. We represent some very wealthy individuals who believe in preserving American agricultural heritage. They don't need immediate returns. They're playing a longer game." "Who are these people?" "That's confidential. But I can tell you they're patriots who understand that family ranches like yours are the backbone of this country. They'd rather see them preserved and properly managed than broken up and sold to developers." The offer was too good to be true. A salary of $60,000 a year, plus full benefits, all ranch expenses covered, complete autonomy in day-to-day operations, and most importantly, Sophia would inherit my position when I was gone, along with the option to eventually buy back the land. I need time to think, of course. But Miss Lawson, the bank is planning to start foreclosure proceedings next week. This offer expires in 48 hours. I signed the contract that night. What choice did I have? I was drowning, and Meridian threw me a lifeline. The next morning, trucks arrived with drilling equipment. Within a week, we had 3 new wells producing clean water. Within a month, the cattle were healthy again. Within 6 months, the ranch was more profitable than it had ever been under my ownership. For 25 years, the arrangement worked perfectly. Meridian sent quarterly checks, covered all major expenses, and never interfered with my decisions. Martin visited 4 times a year, always friendly and supportive. I was the ranch manager, but to everyone else I was still the owner. Even Sophia believed the ranch belonged to me. I planned to tell her the truth when she turned 21, but she was in college then, focused on her studies and her social life. When she graduated, she moved to Houston for her career. The ranch wasn't part of her immediate future, so I kept postponing the conversation. Then Derek came along, and everything changed. The first time he visited the ranch, he walked around like he was conducting an appraisal. He asked pointed questions about acreage, mineral rights, and land values. He wanted to see property records, tax assessments, and profit statement. Just trying to understand Sophia's inheritance, he explained when I caught him photographing the barns and equipment. But his questions were too specific, too calculated. He wasn't just curious about Sophia's future. He was planning something. I called Martin that week. We might have a problem. What kind of problem? Sophia's boyfriend is asking a lot of questions about the property. He's pushing for information I can't give him without revealing the arrangement. How serious is the relationship? Serious enough that he's talking about marriage. There was a long pause. Henry, you know the terms of the contract. If anyone outside the family discovers the true ownership structure, Meridian has the right to terminate the arrangement immediately. I knew. I'd read that clause dozens of times over the year. It was Meridian's protection against publicity or legal complications. If word got out that wealthy investors were secretly buying family ranches, it could create political problems they wanted to avoid. What are my options? Tell your daughter the truth. If she's planning to marry this man, she needs to know what she's really inheriting. But every time I tried to tell Sophia, Derek was there, steering the conversation in different directions, asking his own questions, making his own assumptions. He assumed the ranch was valuable property that would someday belong to Sophia. He assumed I was a wealthy landowner who could afford to be generous with wedding gifts and financial support. He had no idea that I was essentially a well-paid employee managing someone else's investment. Revised and punctuated with name changes. Samuel Wright said, Harrison has been very careful to present a successful facade. Expensive car, upscale apartment, designer clothes, all purchased on credit he can't afford to repay. Michael Dawson consulted his own tablet. The psychological profile is textbook predatory behavior. He targets women with assets, uses manipulation and emotional abuse to gain control, then systematically strips away their resources. His first wife lost her family's jewelry business to his debts. Daniel Chen continued. His second serious relationship ended when the woman discovered he'd forged her signature on loan documents using her house as collateral. The picture was becoming clearer and uglier by the minute. Harrison wasn't just an opportunist, he was a practiced con artist who'd found the perfect mark in my trusting daughter. What's our legal position if he continues to pursue claims on the property? I asked. Daniel Chen smiled coldly. Non-existent. He has no standing whatsoever. The property belongs to Meridian, operated under a management contract with you. Even if he were legitimately married to your daughter, even if you wanted to transfer your management rights to them, he would need approval from this board, which he'll never get. More importantly, Margaret Caldwell said firmly. Patricia Vasquez added, his assault on you last night was witnessed by over 200 people. We have statements from 6 witnesses who've already contacted our legal team. Harrison committed felony assault against a Meridian employee in the course of his duties. I blinked. Felony assault. Assault against a person over 65 is automatically elevated to a felony in Texas. Daniel Chen explained, and since you were acting as our representative, it's also assault against a corporate officer. Mr. Harrison is looking at serious prison time. My phone rang, interrupting the conversation. Harrison's name flashed on the screen. Margaret Caldwell gestured for me to answer it, while Daniel Chen activated a recording app on his tablet. Clifford, thank God. Look, I've been thinking about last night, and I realize I owe you a huge apology. I was way out of line. The stress of the wedding, the champagne, you know how it is. Do I? Come on, don't be like that. We're family now. Family forgives and moves on. I'm thinking we should meet this morning, work out the details of the property transfer, get this ranch situation settled so there's no more confusion. I looked at Margaret Caldwell, who nodded for me to continue. Property transfer? Don't play dumb, Clifford. You know what I'm talking about. Avery deserves her inheritance, and frankly, after last night, I think it's clear you're not competent to manage the ranch anymore. The way you reacted to a simple business discussion, losing your temper like that, the audacity was breathtaking. He was actually trying to rewrite history, making it sound like I was the one who'd become violent. Harrison, are you seriously trying to claim that I hit you? I'm trying to be diplomatic about it. Look, we all saw what happened. You got agitated. You took a swing at me. You lost your balance and fell. It was embarrassing for everyone, especially Avery. Patricia Vasquez was furiously taking notes while Daniel Chen made sure the recording was capturing everything clearly. So, you want me to transfer the ranch to you and Avery? It's the right thing to do, Clifford. And honestly, it's what Avery wants. She's been telling me for months how worried she is about you living alone out there, trying to manage everything by yourself. She'll feel so much better knowing the property is in responsible hands, meaning his. Look, I know you don't like me much, but I'm not going anywhere. Avery and I are married now. I'm going to be part of this family for the rest of your life. We can do this the easy way, or we can do it the hard way. There it was, the threat, delivered with that smooth confidence that had fooled my daughter for 2 years. What's the hard way, Harrison? The hard way is lawyers and doctors and competency hearings. The hard way is Avery having to make some very difficult decisions about her father's mental state. The hard way is public embarrassment for everyone involved. Margaret Caldwell's expression had turned to ice. She gestured for me to keep him talking. And if I just sign over the ranch, all of that goes away. We have a nice family dinner. We put last night behind us. And we start fresh. I'm even willing to let you stay on as a sort of consultant. You could keep living in the house. Help with day-to-day operations. Think of it as a comfortable retirement. The patronizing tone was unbearable. He was offering to let me stay in my own home, as his employee, managing property he thought he was stealing from me. I need to think about it. Don't think too long, Clifford. I've got lawyers on speed dial, and Avery's getting more worried about you by the hour. She spent the whole night crying, asking if her father's losing his mind. He hung up before I could respond. I set the phone down and looked at the faces around me. 5 of the most powerful people I'd ever met, and they all looked furious. Textbook elder abuse, Patricia Vasquez, isolation, gaslighting, financial exploitation, and threats of institutionalization. It's all there. The recording is more than enough for criminal charges. Daniel Chen added, extortion, attempted fraud, and conspiracy to commit elder abuse. Margaret Caldwell stood up. Willington, I want you to call Mr. Harrison back. Tell him you've decided to agree to his demands, but you need to meet in person to sign the papers. Tell him to come to the ranch this afternoon. You want him to come here? Oh yes, we have some things to discuss with Mr. Harris. It's time he learned exactly who he's been threatening. Samuel Wright checked his watch. I'll call our security team. They can be here in 2 hours. Security team? Robert smiled grimly. Meridian protects its investments, Clifford. And more importantly, we protect our people. Mr. Harrison assaulted one of our employees and attempted to defraud one of our properties. That requires a response. I thought about Avery, probably sitting in some hotel room right now, confused and heartbroken, believing that her father had somehow caused the disaster at her wedding. I thought about all the lies Harrison had told her, all the ways he'd twisted her love for me into doubt and worry. What about my daughter? She doesn't know any of this. She will, Margaret Caldwell said firmly. After we're finished with Miss Harrison, we'll sit down with your daughter and explain everything. The truth about the ranch, the truth about her husband, and the truth about what he's been doing to both of you. My phone buzzed with a text message from Harrison. Noon at the ranch. Bring the deed and any other paperwork. Time to make this official. I showed the message to Margaret Caldwell's. She smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Perfect. Mr. Harrison wants to make things official. We'll be happy to accommodate him. They're probably filing criminal charges too. Victor's eyes darted toward the windows as if he was suddenly aware that we might not be alone. Who told you that? He demanded. Does it matter? What matters is that Emily doesn't know, does she? She doesn't know about the gambling debts either, or the credit card bills, or the fact that you owe some very dangerous people a lot of money. He stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the hardwood floor. You've been investigating me. I've been protecting my daughter, the same daughter you've been systematically manipulating for 2 years. Manipulating? His voice rose with genuine outrage. I love Emily. Everything I've done has been for her, for our future together. Everything you've done has been for yourself. You saw a lonely woman with a father you thought was rich, and you saw an opportunity. Victor's composure cracked completely. Rich father? You think you're rich? This place is mortgaged to the hilt, Henry. I've seen the financial records. You're barely breaking even on this cattle operation. The only real asset you have is the land itself. There it was, the admission that he'd been researching my finances, planning to liquidate everything I'd worked for. I kept my voice steady. So you want the land? I want security for my wife. Emily deserves better than worrying about whether her aging father can keep this place running. He leaned forward, his tone becoming patronizing again. Look, I know you're proud. I know this ranch means a lot to you. But be realistic. You're 68 years old. You have no help, and this operation is barely profitable. Sell to a developer. Invest the money properly and everyone wins. Everyone wins? You get financial security for your retirement. Emily gets her inheritance while she's young enough to enjoy it. And I get to take care of both of you the way family should. The way family should. I repeated, coming from a man who just admitted he wanted to sell my grandfather's ranch to developers. What kind of developer are you thinking about? Victor's eyes lit up with excitement. He pulled out his phone and started swiping through photos. I've already had some preliminary conversations. There's a group out of Dallas that specializes in luxury residential communities. They're very interested in this location. He turned the phone toward me, showing architectural renderings of a gated community called Ranch View Estates. 200 houses, a golf course, and a shopping center, all built on what used to be the Lawson Ranch. They're offering $4.8 million for the full 800 acres, Victor continued. Can you imagine, Henry? $4.8 million. You'd never have to worry about money again. I studied the renderings, feeling sick. You've already negotiated a price. Preliminary discussions only. I told them I needed to talk to the family first. But yes, they're very motivated. They want to break ground next spring. And you get a commission on this sale. Victor hesitated just a moment too long. Well, there would be a finder's fee. Standard in these kinds of transactions. How much? 2%. $200,000. He said it quickly, as if the amount didn't matter. But that's not why I'm doing this, Henry. This is about family. $200,000 more than enough to pay off his gambling debts and credit cards, with plenty left over for a fresh start somewhere else. Probably without Emily once she'd served her purpose. What does Emily think about turning her childhood home into a subdivision? Emily wants what's best for you. She trusts me to handle the business side of things. Because you've convinced her that I'm incompetent. Victor's mask slipped again, revealing a flash of irritation. Because you are acting incompetent. This ranch is a losing proposition. And you're too stubborn to admit it. How long do you think you can keep this up? Another 5 years? 10? What happens when you have a heart attack out here alone? What happens when you fall off a horse and break your hip? He was working himself into righteous anger now, believing his own justifications. Emily will inherit this place anyway when you die. All I'm doing is making sure she gets something valuable instead of a pile of debt and broken down buildings. Very thoughtful of you. It is thoughtful, and it's realistic. But you can't see past your own pride to do what's right for your daughter. That's when I heard the sound of car doors slamming outside. Victor heard it too and moved to the window. Who's that? He asked, his voice suddenly tense. I joined him at the window. Margaret Caldwell was walking toward the house, flanked by David Chen and Thomas Wright. Behind them came Robert and the other board members. All 6 of them wore expressions that could have frozen water. Those are the people who actually own this ranch, I said quietly. Victor spun around to face me. What are you talking about? I'm talking about the fact that I don't own the Lawson Ranch, Victor. I never have. I'm the manager. I work for these people. The briefcase slipped from Victor's hands, spilling legal documents across the floor. That's impossible. 25 years ago I was facing bankruptcy. These people bought the ranch and hired me to manage it. Everything you've seen, everything you've planned, everything you've threatened me for, none of it belongs to me. Victor's face went through a series of expressions: confusion, disbelief, and finally understanding. You're lying. I wish I were. But those people walking up to my door, they represent a consortium worth about $2 billion. They own ranches, farms, and agricultural properties across 6 states, and you just spent the last year trying to defraud them. The knock on the door came exactly on cue. I opened it to find Margaret Caldwell and her team waiting on the porch. Mr. Lawson, she said formally, thank you for calling us. I believe you have someone here who wants to discuss property transactions. Victor was backing toward the far wall, his eyes wide with panic. This is a setup. No, Victor, I said sadly. This is reality. Something you've been avoiding for a very long time. Margaret Caldwell stepped into the room, her presence immediately dominating the space. Mr. Hayes, I presume. I'm Margaret Caldwell, chairwoman of the Meridian Investment Consortium. I understand you've been making inquiries about our property. Your property? Victor's voice cracked. The Lawson Ranch, 800 acres of prime Texas cattle land purchased by Meridian in 1998. Margaret replied. Mr. Lawson here is our ranch manager and an excellent one. David Chen opened his own briefcase and pulled out a thick folder. We have copies of your conversation this morning, Mr. Hayes. Extortion, attempted fraud, conspiracy to commit elder abuse. Quite an impressive list of felonies. Victor looked frantically around the room as if searching for an escape route. You can't prove anything. Thomas Wright held up a small digital recorder. Actually, we can't. Every word, recorded with Mr. Lawson's full cooperation. We also have witness statements from your wedding reception, Patricia Vasquez added, entering the room with the others. Punctuated and renamed version. Assault against a senior citizen in front of 200 witnesses. The district attorney is very interested in pursuing charges. Ethan's legs seemed to give out. He slumped into a chair, his head in his hands. This can't be happening. Oh, but it is, Margaret Holloway said coldly. You see, Mr. Grant, Meridian protects its investments. And more importantly, we protect our people. Mr. Walker has served us faithfully for 25 years. When someone threatens him, they threaten us. What do you want? Ethan's voice was barely a whisper. We want you to disappear, she said simply, permanently. From Mr. Walker's life, from this property, and from Texas if you're smart. Daniel Cho placed a document on the table. This is a restraining order effective immediately. You are prohibited from contacting Mr. Walker, his daughter, or anyone associated with this property. Violation will result in immediate arrest. You can't do this. Emily is my wife. Actually, Sophia Reyes said, checking her tablet. Your marriage may not be valid. Our investigation has revealed some interesting facts about your previous relationships. There's evidence suggesting you never properly divorced your first wife. Ethan's face went white. That's impossible. Is it? We'll let the authorities sort that out. In the meantime, you have exactly 1 hour to collect your belongings and leave the state. Margaret Holloway moved closer, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. Mr. Grant, you are a small, pathetic man who preys on vulnerable women. You are exactly the kind of predator we've spent 25 years keeping away from properties like this one. She straightened up, her voice returning to normal volume. You will not contact Emily. You will not attempt to claim any property or asset. You will disappear quietly, or we will destroy you completely. Do I make myself clear? Ethan nodded frantically, then looked at me with something like pleading in his eyes. James Walker, please. I made mistakes, but I really do love Emily. I met his gaze steadily. If you loved my daughter, you never would have tried to steal her inheritance. You never would have lied to her about me. And you sure as hell never would have hit me at her wedding. The security team appeared in the doorway, 3 large men who somehow made the room feel smaller. Time to go, Mr. Grant, one of them said politely. Ethan gathered his scattered papers with shaking hands, stuffed them back into his briefcase, and walked toward the door. At the threshold, he turned back one last time. This isn't over. Margaret Holloway smiled, but there was no warmth in it whatsoever. Oh, Mr. Grant, this is very, very over. The silence after Ethan's departure was profound. I stood on my porch, watching the dust settle from his BMW as it disappeared down the ranch road, knowing I'd never see him again. The Meridian board members were gathered in my living room, quietly packing up their documents and preparing for what would be the most difficult conversation of my life. Mr. Walker, Margaret Holloway said gently, we need to discuss your daughter Emily. Sweet, trusting Emily, who was probably sitting in some hotel room right now, wondering why her wedding had ended in disaster and why her new husband had suddenly vanished. She had no idea that her marriage was likely invalid, that Ethan had been planning to steal her inheritance, or that everything she believed about her family was built on a 25-year-old lie. She's going to hate me, I said quietly. Robert Lane shook his head. She's going to be hurt and confused, but she's also going to be relieved once she understands what Ethan was really planning. Daniel Cho looked up from his tablet. We've located her. She's at the Four Seasons downtown. Our investigators spoke with the hotel staff. She's been in her room since last night, refusing all calls except from Ethan, who stopped calling about an hour ago. Sophia Reyes added meaningfully. Margaret Holloway made a decision. We'll go to her together, all of us. She needs to hear the truth from you, but she also needs to understand the larger picture. An hour later, we were sitting in the hotel's private conference room. Emily arrived looking exhausted and confused, still wearing yesterday's wedding dress. Her eyes were red from crying when she saw me with 6 strangers in business suits. Her confusion deepened. Dad, what's going on? Where's Ethan? He was supposed to meet me here hours ago, but he's not answering his phone. I guided her to a chair, my heart breaking at the trust still visible in her eyes. Honey, we need to talk. There are some things you need to know. Is this about last night? About what happened at the reception? She looked around the room nervous. Dad, I know Ethan shouldn't have. I know he lost his temper, but you were being so difficult about the ranch, and he's been under a lot of pressure. Emily, my voice was firmer than I intended. Ethan hit me. He assaulted me in front of 200 people because I wouldn't give him something that was never mine to give. Never yours to give. Dad, what are you talking about? Margaret Holloway leaned forward. Miss Grant. Wellington. Emily corrected automatically. I kept my name. Miss Wellington. I'm Margaret Holloway. I represent the Meridian Investment Consortium. We own the Double Creek Ranch. The words hung in the air like a physical presence. Emily blinked several times as if she hadn't heard correctly. You own, but that's impossible. The ranch has been in our family for generations. It was in your family, Robert Lane explained gently, until 25 years ago when your father was facing bankruptcy after your mother's medical bills. Meridian purchased the property and hired your father as ranch manager. I watched my daughter's face as the implications hit her. Ranch manager. I'm an employee, honey. A well-paid, well-treated employee, but an employee nonetheless. I've never owned the land. I never had the right to transfer it to you or anyone else. Emily's breathing became shallow. But you always talked about it being my inheritance. You always said the ranch would be mine someday. And it could be, Margaret Holloway said. Meridian has always been willing to sell the property back to the Walker family if and when they were in a position to purchase. How much would that cost? Daniel Cho consulted his tablet. Current market value is approximately $4.2 million. The number hit Emily like a physical blow. She slumped back in her chair, staring at nothing. $4.2 million. Ethan thought he was marrying into wealth. Thomas Reed said bluntly, he spent 2 years planning to steal what he believed was your inheritance. Sophia Reyes opened her briefcase and pulled out a thick folder. Wellington, we need you to understand exactly who you married. Ethan Grant is a con artist with a pattern of targeting women with assets. For the next 30 minutes, they laid out everything: Ethan's debts, his employment problems, his history of financial fraud. They showed her the recordings of his phone calls, the evidence of his manipulation, the proof that he'd been planning to sell the ranch to developers. But the worst revelation came last. There's also evidence suggesting that your marriage may not be legally valid. Daniel Reyes said carefully. Victor seems to have never properly divorced his first wife. Sophia made a sound like a wounded animal. He's married to someone else? Was married, Daniel corrected. The first wife has been missing for 3 years. There's an ongoing investigation. My daughter doubled over as if she'd been punched in the stomach. I reached for her, but she pulled away. Don't, she whispered. Just don't. We sat in silence for several minutes. I could hear traffic outside, the distant sound of the city continuing its daily business while my daughter's world fell apart in a hotel conference room. Finally, she looked up at me with eyes full of pain. Did you know about Victor? Did you know what he was doing? I suspected. I tried to investigate, but I couldn't prove anything until recently. Why didn't you tell me? It was the question I'd been dreading. Because I hoped you'd see through him on your own. Because I didn't want to be the father who destroyed his daughter's happiness based on suspicions. And because you were afraid I wouldn't believe you, she said quietly. I nodded. He was very good at making me look like the problem, making you doubt my judgment, my competence. Sophia was quiet for a long time, processing everything she'd learned. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady but distant. I need time. I need to think about all of this. Margaret Hill stood up. Of course. Take all the time you need. Miss Lawson's position at the ranch is secure for as long as he wants it. And if you ever decide you want to discuss purchasing the property, we're always willing to negotiate with the Lawson family. After they left, Sophia and I sat alone in the conference room. The silence stretched between us, filled with 25 years of secrets and 2 years of manipulation. I feel so stupid, she finally said. You're not stupid, you're trusting. There's a difference. Is there? I let a stranger convince me that my own father was losing his mind. I believed Victor when he said you were becoming forgetful, unstable. I actually started researching nursing homes. Dad, I was planning to have you declared incompetent. The confession hit me harder than Victor's slap had. Honey, no. Let me finish. I let him poison my relationship with you. I let him make me doubt everything I knew about the man who raised me, who worked himself to the bone to give me a good life after Mom died. Tears were streaming down her face now. And for what? For a man who saw me as nothing but a path to money he could steal. I reached for her hand, and this time she didn't pull away. Victor was a professional. He knew exactly how to manipulate both of us, but I should have known better. I should have trusted you. We sat holding hands while she cried, both of us grieving for different things. She was mourning the loss of her marriage, her trust, her sense of judgment. I was mourning the relationship we'd lost to Victor's lies, and the innocence she'd never get back. 3 months later, Sophia moved back to the ranch, not permanently, but for an extended stay while she sorted out the legal mess of her invalid marriage and rebuilt her life. The annulment was surprisingly simple once Victor's bigamy was confirmed. He never contested anything, probably because he was too busy staying ahead of both creditors and law enforcement. We never heard from him again. The last report from Meridian's investigators placed him in Mexico, apparently trying to start fresh with a new identity. I hoped he'd learned something from his experience, but I doubted it. Men like Victor James rarely change. The ranch felt different with Sophia there. She threw herself into the work with the intensity of someone trying to outrun her thoughts. She learned to mend fences, helped with cattle vaccinations, and took over the bookkeeping with an efficiency that impressed even Margaret Hill during her quarterly visit. "Your daughter has excellent business instincts," Margaret told me one afternoon as we watched Sophia negotiate with a cattle buyer. "If she ever wants to make an offer on the property, I think the board would be very receptive." But money wasn't the issue anymore. Sophia's trust fund from her mother's life insurance, combined with her own savings and earning potential, would be enough for a down payment. The real question was whether she wanted to tie herself to this place, to this life, after everything that had happened. The answer came on a quiet Sunday evening in December. We were sitting on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink when she finally brought it up. "I want to buy the ranch," she said simply. "Are you sure? You don't have to feel obligated." "I'm not doing it out of obligation. I'm doing it because this is home. Because this is where Mom and I picked wildflowers every spring. Because this is where you taught me to ride. Because this is where I learned what real love looks like." She paused, then continued more quietly. "Victor made me forget who I was, where I came from. He made me ashamed of this place, embarrassed by our simple life. But there's nothing simple about what you've built here, Dad. There's nothing embarrassing about honest work and taking care of the land." 6 months later, the transfer was complete. Sophia Lawson became the official owner of the Double L Ranch, with a mortgage she could comfortably afford, and a father who stayed on as ranch manager, though now he answered to her instead of Meridian. Margaret Hill attended the closing ceremony, bringing champagne and an unexpected gift. 25 years ago, Meridian bought this ranch to preserve it," she said, raising her glass. "Today we're selling it back to the family that loves it most. It's exactly the outcome we hoped for when we first met your father." As I watched Sophia sign the papers that made her a landowner, I felt a peace I hadn't experienced since her mother died. My daughter was home, she was safe, and she was in control of her own destiny. Victor James was a bad memory that was fading more each day. That evening, as we walked the fence line together, checking for damage from the recent storms, Sophia asked the question I'd been expecting. "Do you ever regret it, keeping the truth about Meridian from me for so long?" I considered the question carefully. "I regret that it made you vulnerable to Victor's manipulation. I regret that it complicated your relationship with the ranch. But I don't regret protecting you from financial worries when you were young. And I don't regret working with people who cared more about preserving this land than making a quick profit." She nodded, then surprised me with her next comment. "I've been thinking about Mom lately, about what she would say about all this. What do you think she'd say?" Sophia smiled, the first genuinely happy expression I'd seen from her in months. "I think she'd say that families protect each other no matter what, and that home isn't about who owns the deed. It's about who belongs here." As we walked back toward the house, I realized that Victor James had given us an unexpected gift. By trying to destroy our family, he'd forced us to rebuild it on a foundation of truth, instead of secrets. We were stronger now, more honest with each other, more appreciative of what we. The ranch lights were warm and welcoming as we approached the house. Somewhere in the distance, cattle were settling in for the night. The land stretched out around us, familiar and comforting, ours again in the way that mattered most. I was finally free from the weight of secrets, and my daughter was finally free from the influence of a man who'd never deserved her trust. It wasn't the ending either of us had planned, but it was the ending we needed. Sometimes the best revenge is simply outlasting those who try to destroy you. Sometimes the greatest victory is finding peace with the truth, no matter how complicated that truth might be. Now I'm curious about you who listen to my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Comment below. And meanwhile, I'm leaving on the final screen 2 other stories that are channel favorites, and they will definitely surprise you. Thank you for watching until here.